Comedian D.L. Hughley announced he tested positive for COVID-19 after collapsing on stage during a performance at a Nashville comedy club. Hughley said he learned about his diagnosis while being treated for exhaustion and dehydration at a local hospital. And joining us now, one of the original kings of comedy, D.L. Hughley. He hosts the national radio program, The D.L. Hughley Show, and he's the author of the new book entitled Surrender White People, Our Unconditional Terms for Peace. D.L., good morning. Quite the title. We'll talk about that book in just a minute. But first of all, how are you feeling after that extraordinary scene in Nashville? And kind of take us through that night and what the next few days were like for you.
Well, actually, I had the previous week I had been in Dallas, and then I'd gotten home, and then I was preparing for a gig in Nashville. I had to do my radio show, my TV show, and I didn't actually feel anything. And I got on the plane and did the 2 Thursday shows, and then we got up and did my radio show and walked my dog in Nashville and ran 5 miles and got on stage, and all of a sudden the lights went out. And so, I mean, I knew that I was, a bit, tired, but that's pretty typical. And then when I got to the emergency room, they, obviously ran a battery of tests and said that I was exhausted and dehydrated. My electrolytes are low. And then they asked could they run some other tests. One of them was the COVID test. And of course I said yes. And then a couple hours later they said I was positive. And so they told me I needed to quarantine, and so I was kind of blown away. My first thought was I hope that, later on I would find out my son had it, and, so I'd given it to my son and some people at the radio station that I work with. So that was my first thought. I hope I didn't kill anybody.
So DL, what was it like then? Because you kind of had an ordeal trying to get home, I understand. It's tough if you come out and said publicly that you have coronavirus to get on a plane going anywhere.
Right. Well, in retrospect, I probably should have gotten home before I made the announcement, but I thought I was kind of so worried about, that I exposed people. So from when they were releasing me, I made the announcement that I had it, and I had no idea, obviously, that it would go viral. But when I got to the hotel, I was going to quarantine in Nashville at the hotel, and my security guy gets a call, and they were obviously more comfortable with me leaving. So we had to call, of course, American Airlines. That was commercial airlines was never going to happen. So we tried to charter a bunch of jets, and a bunch of them fell through, and then finally we got one and we're able to get home.
DL, I'm wondering if, first of all, what your takeaway is, if you've learned anything about the coronavirus since this horrible experience, and also just from kind of looking at the small scene that we saw, it seemed pretty tight. And I saw, people not wearing masks. Were you at all concerned about at how close-knit the room was, given the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, the thing that was interesting, I assumed that I had it in January because I was very, very sick in January, with all the symptoms, as opposed to this time having no symptoms. In January, I was really, really sick and had to keep going back to the doctor, and they said it was an upper respiratory thing. So I'd assumed that I'd had it. But one of the things, we took our temperature every day, and, everybody, all the servers wore masks, and they had taken a third of the room out. So according to the healthcare, the department guidelines, they're taking a third of the room out. And so I never, traditionally you would do a meet and greet. We didn't do that, any of that. There was no, so I walked right from the stage and on. So in retrospect, I think the thing I take away from this is that how many people are walking around not knowing that they are have the potential to expose people, and really how ad hoc our approach is. Like, one of the reasons that people are getting so is primarily there is no central edicts. Nobody tells you what to do. It varies from city to city, municipality to municipality. One of the people are dying right now, literally, and I never saw it more stark in my life, from lack of leadership. There is nobody. Yeah. You have to wear masks here. You don't here. You can do this. This establishment can be over here, and this one can't. Our approach is like a patchwork quilt, and I think it's one of the reasons that people are going to die, and droves, primarily because there is no centralized. Nobody's telling anybody what to do. Everybody's kind of running on their own. It's very ad hoc.
Yeah. Yeah, there are other countries that have had clear mitigation techniques in place, and they are doing better than us. DL, let's turn to the new book. And for that, we also have with us host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. Also, Erin Haynes is with us. She is editor-at-large for The 19th, a nonprofit newsroom focused on the intersection of women politics and policy. Reverend Al, we'll start with you.
DL, first of all, I'm glad you're healthy. You and I talked about, I'm doing good. You and I have talked about race for a couple of decades now. And when I saw the title of your book, obviously it's going to jar a lot of people's attention. And I think as we have had to deal with addressing hate in this country, particularly under this administration, part of it, which you and I have talked about, is that we've got to not project hate ourselves to fight hate. We've got to always be self-aware and correct a lot. 20, 25 years ago, a lot of stuff I would say never was a hater, didn't say some of the things, but did say others. And you got to be able to be honest with yourself, which makes you then the best person to come forward, as you are in this book, challenging others because you get those toxics out of yourself. Do you deal with a lot of that in the book?
Primarily what I look at is my kind of vantage point. I think my obligation as an entertainer, as an author, as a comedian is just to be truthful. I don't have, all I can tell you is what I see. And I think primarily when I say surrender white people, it isn't on a battlefield. It is this notion of supremacy that finds us, that we keep finding us. It's particularly telling that my father, his father, his father's father, his father's father has felt the same level of fear and frustration that I do. It's almost family crap. And so I think that the thing that I tried to do is people should dispel the notion that white supremacy isn't toxic and isn't pervasive and it isn't destroying America. Right now, America is being destroyed because we decided that Trump's personal appeal was to this notion of supremacy. Even as recently as a couple of days ago, people are dying right now because they decided a white supremacist was better than any other. And our economy's in shambles. Our streets are on fire. People are dying literally of a pandemic. And for some people, that is enough. And I think that you have to, my gig is to make people laugh as much as I can, but just to be as honest as I can. But I think that honesty has a level of toxicity. That's not my thing. That's not up to me.
Well, DL, congratulations on the book, and I'm glad to hear that you are on the mend. You are somebody, to Reverend Sharpton's point, that has been telling the truth about this country for a long time. And you started this book, a year and a half ago, trying to start a conversation on race.
Sure.
And so since you brought up white people, I want to ask you, we're seeing so many more white people than we saw kind of at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement in the streets, joining us, a lot of black folks in protests. On the street. I'm wondering, just the idea that Black Lives Matter now is becoming a more mainstream idea, and that we're talking about reparations in a 2020 presidential cycle, something that you also talk about in the book. What do you make of that and the prospects for us maybe having these old fights in a new day?
I am heartened by just watching the fact that young people of all races, of all hues, of all religions are really risking life. I've watched people be beaten, people in the hospital shot with rubber bullets. People are bleeding for this idea that Black Lives Matter. It is on the list of people. NASCAR cares about Black lives. I mean, the NBA, the NFL, well, obviously you would expect that from, but just run-of-the-mill people, even the latest polls say that 75% of the Americans are really realizing what we've been saying all the time. But in that, right now, I think that there's always a dichotomy, like I talk about in the book. Like you'll have people right now who were appalled by what they saw with George Floyd, the specter of him being executed on our streets. But they will, and they want something done about it. But they fight to keep the monuments of men who did far worse to black people. They're protecting Andrew Jackson. He killed thousands. It's an interesting dichotomy to watch people want things to go out. Like I watch people talk about I watched this young conservative woman tell me how America's dream was, a black woman, a free black slave on a pancake box, and how America's more comfortable with a black woman on a pancake box than on a $20 bill. And the book is just saying we need to let go of these notions that hold us back and make everybody part of this grand experiment that we call America. We love America as much as everybody else, but there should never be an asterisk next to our name.
Do we also need to make sure, DL, that we resolve some of these with protecting our rights, since you have white supremacy in this country, so that we must deal with continuing the demonstrations that all of us are in, young, old, black, white, but also have legislation that's enforceable, because I may never be able to make somebody like me, but I sure should be able to stop them from putting their knee on my neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
The fact that we're having an argument about an archaic approach to policing, first off, qualified immunity is I don't think anybody should have that. You don't have it. You can't have it in any other job, but now all of a sudden you can have it. I think that is a misnomer. I think that no one should be able to choke somebody to death. Not as it's more punitive than anybody did anything. I think that we have to understand clearly that America has been patently unfair. And to pretend like it isn't is one of the things that hold us back to, in any other endeavor, they say that to solve the problem, you have to admit that there is one. And I'm certainly glad that America is seeing that. My job more than anything else is to make is to look and laugh, to say what I see. Your job as an activist and a civil rights leader takes on a different tone. But for me, truth and kind of humor and irony are the only thing I'm primarily compared to that. It's the only thing I'm concerned about. It's what I want to project. And I think through humor, people see themselves. And that's really as unvarnished and as truthful and as honest as I can be about things. It's what I try to do comedically and what I try to do in this book.
The new book is Surrender, White People, Our Unconditional Terms for Peace. D.L. Hughley, thank you so much for being on this morning. And that does it for us this morning. Ayman Mohyeldin picks up the coverage right now.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.